The dominant narrative at any stage of human history will inevitably seek to portray the system it serves as the natural order of things. In the modern world, with its mass media spewing forth a deluge of self-serving propaganda, the capitalist system, often shielded behind the term democracy, is promoted as being fully in tune with a thing called human nature. That capitalism is somehow a natural phenomenon, that it's simply human nature, is however very much an ahistorical viewpoint. And today we're gonna examine why. But first, if you're new here, then go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell below for bi-weekly Marxist educational content and analysis. If you're in a position to do so and you want to make these videos a weekly thing, then consider tossing a couple of euro or dollar per month over on Patreon so we can pay for an editor to help get the goods out every single Friday. If you're not in a position to support financially, you can also help out by sharing this video around on social media. Now, you've probably heard the claim that capitalism benefits the majority of humanity, its exponents parroting the declaration that capitalism made your iPhone. However, this is completely incorrect. Labour makes all iPhones, ironically under the direction of capitalism, which ensures that all are designed to break through inbuilt planned obsolescence. In fact, beyond that which is provided by nature, labour makes all things under whatever system, the system itself deciding who gets to enjoy the lion's share of the profit generated by this labour. There's also the promoted myth of there being a direct link between hard work and wealth, whereby workers are harassed into loving the grind, while the world's wealthiest do no work at all. The delusion that anyone can make it encourages the masses to sit in the dust and dream of reaching the stars, when we should be collectively throwing up ladders and storming the heavens. Capitalism creates a paradigm that exalts greed as a necessity and portrays poverty as an individual failure rather than an engineered part of the system. Wealth is passed off as merit, and capitalism's ideologues justify punishing the sick and the poor as though poverty was a character flaw. Meanwhile, capitalists create wealth, like vampires create blood. The economist John Maynard Keynes was no revolutionary, but his understanding of economics reportedly led even him to the conclusion that capitalism is the extraordinary belief that the nastiest of men, for the nastiest of motives, will somehow work together for the benefit of all. Despite capitalist ideologues' best efforts, reality can't be ignored. Around 18 million people die every single year from poverty-related causes, making up 1/3 of all human deaths. At the same time, global agricultural production can feed more than 1.5 times the global population every day, while an estimated 868 million people go hungry, causing 9 million deaths per year. Michael Parenti observes that most of the world is capitalist and most of the world is poor. There will always be poverty under capitalism because capitalism requires poverty to function. The idea that this is an inevitable part of society that can never be remedied is nothing more than a capitalist myth that's been repeatedly disseminated through a 24/7 onslaught of propaganda. This takes place through its countless media outlets which cultivate within each of us a supposed common sense. A common sense which just so happens to coincide with the ruling class's interests. Prevalent among capitalism's defenders is the delusion that those who control the present somehow control the future, imagining the here and now to be the end of history. This point of view was made flesh by Francis Fukuyama in his book The End of History and the Last Man, an attempt to give theoretical legitimacy to the capitalist system that had, for all intents and purposes, appeared to emerge victorious from the Cold War. Not surprisingly, it was a theory constructed from narrow analysis that had scorned history and so ultimately had no future. Fukuyama attempted to crudely weld Hegel to Nietzsche, promoting the will to power over the class struggle that capitalism's enemies advocated. But capitalism's inherent laws couldn't be denied, and over the 3 decades of the descending zigzag of booms and busts since its publication, Fukuyama's endeavour has found itself floating face down in the waters of history. Lacking a reliable theoretical basis that could appeal to the masses then, Winston Churchill's assertion that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all others that have been tried, was widely trotted out. Here again, democracy being used as a synonym for capitalism. This glib foolishness, masquerading as wisdom, functions as a thought-terminating cliché which closes down any debate. Designed as a defeatist, demotivational notion in which this is just the way the world is, it marked a refusal to take an Olympian view which comprehensively analysed the totality of the situation, of economics, of politics, and of history itself. However, the amount of time and energy required to knock down such shibboleths is an order of magnitude greater than that required to produce them. The notion that capitalism is more beneficial to humanity than not is one of the greatest lies of the modern era. It's 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the Arctic, 26 billionaires hoard half the Earth's wealth, and up to 150 species of animal are made extinct every single day. In an age of supercomputers and space travel, we still need to work 40 to 60 hours a week just to avoid starving and freezing to death. At a time when the world has already reached an era of global abundance, any scarcity that currently exists is intentionally created by those that hoard all the wealth. Landlords don't provide housing. Instead, they deny housing to the people by buying up more properties than are needed, depleting the market supply in the process. The hoarded excess is then rented back out to people who now can't purchase because house prices have consequently been driven up so high. It's not that society can't feed, clothe and house the poor, it's rather that capitalism can't satisfy the rich. But it doesn't need to be this way, and it's both possible and necessary to uncover and analyse the origins of the oppressive institutions that have given rise to this situation so that they may be overcome. Karl Marx explains that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. Historical materialism teaches that all societies in origin develop out of the level of productive forces and the relations of production that accompany them. Friedrich Engels, in his work The Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State, traces the stages of human development that eventually arrive at capitalism, demonstrating how history is driven by humanity's relationship to production. As a society's tools and understanding of the world become more and more advanced, humanity gradually moves towards the next stage of economic development. Anatomically modern humans as we know them first make their appearance around 200,000 BC, but it's not until 1600 to 1700 AD that capitalism begins to arise. Meaning capitalism has been around for less than 0.5% of humanity's existence. Now, 5 main types of historical modes of production are recognised: primitive communism, slave society, feudalism, capitalism, and socialism, or industrial communism in its lower or higher stages. Under the primitive communal phase, by far the longest lasting in any society, the means of production are socially owned, corresponding to the character of the productive forces at this stage. Stone implements and later the bow are the primary tools, and in this phase man doesn't oppress man, or people don't oppress people in any kind of systemic manner. In such societies, there was no material basis for the patriarchal oppression of women and LGBT+ people or any significant level of private property. Individuals owned tools and weapons, but land was held in common. Early humans were, however, effectively oppressed by nature, the harshness of survival obliging them to cooperate. Thus, common labour ensured the common ownership of the means of production, and such people might be forgiven for believing that cooperation and holding the means of production in common was the natural order of things. Quite a different conception of human nature to that which pervades today. Such societies flourished without private property, class, estate, or a patriarchal family structure. Engels next proceeded to look at the development of ancient Greece from Gentile or gens-based into class society as an example of emerging slaveholding society. At this time in written history, gens was based on patrilineal father right as opposed to primitive communal matrilineal mother right due to the level of productive forces whereby agriculture, herding and animal husbandry had now been developed. Such livestock were not tools, but represented a new surplus that was owned by men and could be exchanged. This contributed wealth, this new source of economic power. Earlier societies could only hunt animals rather than domesticating them. And because surplus livestock multiplied faster than the family of men, slavery suddenly became not only possible with all this extra food lying around from agriculture and pastoralism, but in fact advantageous, at least for the owners. Thus, the development of classes brought exploitation. In slave-owning society, the basis of relations of production ensured that the slave owner owned the means of production, including the workers themselves. Such relations corresponded to the state of productive forces of that period wherein society developed metal tools and weapons. The primitive husbandry of the hunter transformed into pastoral tillage, handicrafts, and a division of labour. The accumulation of wealth began passing into the hands of the few, and a significant section of the population were converted into slaves. The free labour of all members of society was replaced by forced labour exploited by non-labouring slave owners, and class struggle developed wherein people with full rights, the rich, exploited people with no rights, the poor. In the emergent Athenian society, the growth of commodity exchange and the division of society into antagonistic classes led to the need for a professional police force distinct from an armed population to be served by a central authority to keep the slave population in check. This structure regulated trade between other classes and protected merchants from bandits. Laws relating to money, debt, credit, usury, phenomena arising from commodity exchange, were drawn up and enforced. This state structure was an organ designed specifically to suppress the lower classes and to mediate conflict between the exploiters. Human development continued to advance, and under the later feudal system, relations of production involved the feudal lord, who now owned the means of production. The landowner didn't own the worker, usually the serf, but could still exert great power over them. The serf differed from the slave, who had no interest in work, in that the serf had their own tools, husbandry, and some degree of interest in work that was necessary for their cultivation of the land and for their payment to the feudal lord. This system allowed the serf to garner some small crumbs of wealth from the land they occupied and worked. Under the next stage, capitalism, the capitalist owns the means of production but not the workers. The workers, however, the wage labourers, are personally free but don't own any of the means of production and, to avoid starving, must sell their labour power to the capitalist wherein they're exploited. In place of manorial estates tilled with implements used by peasants are capitalist forms of agricultural machinery and urban factories. However, capitalism creates its own contradictions which it's unable to resolve. Producing large numbers of commodities and reducing their prices, competition becomes intensified, destroying small and medium private producers. By expanding production and concentrating it along with the mass of workers in huge mills and factories, capitalism creates a social character, bringing its workers together. Meanwhile, the product of this socialised labour is pocketed privately by the capitalists. Social production, private appropriation. Periodic crises of overproduction are unavoidable, wherein capitalists, finding no demand for their innumerable goods due to the impoverishing of the wider population, are forced to destroy vast quantities of goods. This means that the relations of production have ceased to correspond to the state of productive forces due to coming into irreconcilable contradiction, which is where we find ourselves right now. As W.E.B. Du Bois states, capitalism cannot reform itself, it is doomed to self-destruction. No universal selfishness can bring social good to all. Capitalism, therefore, has revolution burning within it, so that socialism will be brought forth by the working class that capitalism has created and exploited, the proletariat. The most acute form of class struggle exists under capitalism, and the capitalists, heavily engaged in their class war through their attempts to suppress wages, evict tenants that are unable to pay their rents, and invest millions in information outlets assuring their class enemies that human nature makes socialism unworkable. And so, when the many mouthpieces of the establishment continuously seek to assure us that capitalism is part of our human nature, we're inclined to believe them, hardwired as we have been for millennia to trust one another, as was all important to our survival since the beginning of human history. Mao Zedong, however, points out that in class society, everyone lives as a member of a particular class, and every kind of thinking, without exception, is stamped with the brand of a class. When capitalists and their apologists claim that capitalism derives from human nature, they themselves are staring into a Nietzschean abyss, not realising that it's actually a mirror reflecting back at them their own class viewpoints, wishes, and aspirations. In an era where the world's 8 richest people have the same wealth as the poorest 3.6 billion, we can be reminded of William Z. Foster's assertion that never until capitalism appeared on the world stage was such an anomaly possible, starvation in the midst of plenty. Albert Einstein once said that the real purpose of socialism is precisely to advance beyond the predatory phase of human development. If oppressive institutions emerge only out of certain specific material conditions, then it's entirely possible that these in turn will vanish or be superseded when conditions change and these contradictions are resolved. That the world is run by a loathsome super wealthy elite is well and widely known. The many sources of this wealth and the misery this causes, however, are safely obscured, and the masses' rightful resentment of this section of society is hand-waved away as bigotry brought on by envy. The world's richest people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos find themselves amidst a fierce tug-of-war in the minds of the masses between being revered and despised. A reflection of the struggle between the rotten, corrupt, dying world of capitalism and the aspirations for a better world that struggles to be born. John Maclean presents the human nature needed for tomorrow when he states that there are two classes of morality. There is the working class morality and there is the capitalist class morality. What's moral for the one class is absolutely immoral for the other, and vice versa. My appeal is to the working class. I appeal exclusively to them because they and they only can bring about the time when the whole world will be in one brotherhood on a sound economic foundation. That and that alone can be the means of bringing about a reorganisation of society. As a self-serving mantra for the ruling class, the claim that the capitalist system is the natural order for humanity is an assertion that doesn't stand up to any kind of serious analysis. The benefits of capitalism continue to be felt only by the small minority that is the bourgeoisie, while its enormous drawbacks are experienced by the vast majority, the exploited workers and oppressed peoples. The intellectual bankruptcy of capitalism's apologists find their defence not in reasoned argument, as this might drive opinions in the wrong direction, but in shallow thought termination cliches that preach defeat, creating familiarity and general acceptance through casual repetition. Relying on a blind Eurocentrism that primarily uses the Western individual as its test subject, this analysis further ascribes the viewpoint of the numerically minuscule dominant capitalist class as being that of all humanity. But make no mistake, capitalism is not human nature. After all, capitalism has been around for less than 0.5% of humanity's existence. Meanwhile, our species lived in stateless, classless, communal society for over 95% of the time that we've been on this planet. Capitalism is not human nature, but in fact nothing more than the depraved nature of the historically relatively new capitalist class itself. Right, thanks very much for watching this video. Hopefully you found it useful in one way or another. As always, thank you to the Herculean supporters over on Patreon who continue to make each of these videos possible with their generous donations. Thank you Blue Collar Red, Julia Affentranger, Ugopnik, Jacob Jaff, Grimwater, Borkura Gorilla, Ryan Hodgson, Soup, Michaela Schmid, Christian Nepales, Alfonso Dingo Torres, Rock Artist, Zakasi, Anglo-Irish Bolshevik, Thomas Rawson Wood, Bobby Block, Jason Schmidt, Mitch Schiller, Saoirse Ní Bhealán, Roja, MLM in Practice, Eric Lindahl, Robert Jarzak, Miss Miyamoto, Anastasia, Wonderbad, JT Chapman, Joseph Shepard, Comrade Amara, Wealth for the 99%, Peter Krause, Hagen Mitchells and Soy Mesmer. Cheers everyone, agus slán go fóill.